The golden chandeliers of Vienna's grand concert hall cast a warm glow over the crowd of well-dressed guests, mingling before the evening's performance. The annual charity gala had drawn the city's elite, wealthy patrons of the arts, music, critics with discerning ears, and talented musicians from across Europe. Among them, moving with confident strides and surrounded by admirers, was Victor Lebedev. At 43, Victor was at the height of his career. His recordings of Chopin's nocturnes had broken sales records, and his concerts sold out months in advance. Tonight, he would be the headline performer at the gala, a fact he reminded everyone of with his booming laugh and theatrical gestures. "I've added a little surprise to the third movement," Victor told the small circle gathered around him, his Russian accent giving his words a melodic quality. "Something no one has ever attempted before." He smiled as his admirers nodded appreciatively, hanging on his every word. Across the room, Elena Sorokin stood alone near one of the tall windows, a glass of sparkling water in her hand. At 47, she had the kind of face that showed life's experiences, laugh lines around her eyes, a gentle curve to her mouth that suggested she smiled often. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style, and she wore a modest blue dress that she had carefully selected for her first charity gala. Elena taught music to third graders at a small elementary school on the outskirts of Vienna. She had moved from Moscow 25 years ago, leaving behind dreams bigger than most people would ever understand. Tonight she was here only because one of her students' parents had donated a ticket to the school's raffle, and Elena had won. Taking a small sip of her water, she glanced around the room, feeling out of place among the wealthy patrons. Next, to her, two older women chatted about the upcoming performance. "Lebedev is a genius, of course," one woman said, "but sometimes I find him a bit showy." "That's part of his charm," her friend replied, "though I do miss the days when musicians let their playing speak for itself." Elena couldn't help but smile. She had followed Victor's career from afar, admiring his technical brilliance while sometimes wondering if he truly felt the music he played. "Do you play?" the first woman asked, noticing Elena's interest in their conversation. "Oh," Elena said, caught off guard. "I used to, a long time ago." "Professionally?" "Almost," Elena replied with a small smile. "I studied at the Moscow Conservatory, but life had other plans." She didn't elaborate, didn't mention the illness that had struck her mother, requiring Elena to abandon her studies and care for her family. She didn't speak of the years spent teaching piano to children of wealthy families to make ends meet, or how those lessons had eventually led her to discover her love for teaching. The women nodded politely, but their attention had already shifted, back to scanning the room for more interesting conversation partners. Elena was used to this. In her simple dress, without designer jewelry or important connections, she was virtually invisible to most people here. Across the room, Victor's circle had grown larger. The director of the concert hall had joined them, along with several music critics and a famous violinist. They laughed at Victor's jokes and nodded at his opinions on the state of classical music today. "The problem," Victor was saying, his voice carrying across the room, "is that everyone thinks they can play. Everyone believes they have something special to offer." He took a sip of his champagne. "But true talent, true artistry, that is rare, my friends. Very rare." His circle murmured in agreement. One young pianist, clearly hoping to impress Victor, added, "The amateurs simply don't understand the years of discipline required." "Exactly," Victor said, clapping the young man on the shoulder. "They play a simple piece correctly and think they've accomplished something extraordinary." Elena felt her cheeks grow warm. Though Victor wasn't speaking to her, his words stung. They reminded her of the doubts that had plagued her for years, that perhaps she had never been good enough, that abandoning her career had been inevitable, rather than a sacrifice. A waiter passed by offering champagne. Elena declined, but Victor, spotting the movement, looked over. His eyes swept past her at first, then returned, narrowing slightly. "You," he said, his voice cutting through the ambient chatter. "I saw you nodding. Do you disagree with something I've said?" The room didn't fall silent, but the conversations nearest them quieted. Elena felt her heart beat faster as several heads turned in her direction. "Not at all," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I was just listening." Victor stepped away from his admirers, moving toward her with the confidence of a man used to commanding attention. "You play, yes?" he asked, studying her face. "I used to," Elena admitted. "Many years ago." Something flickered in Victor's eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or the recognition of an opportunity for entertainment. "What a coincidence," he said, loud. Enough for those nearby to hear. "We were just discussing the difference between true artists and enthusiasts." A few people chuckled. Elena felt heat rising to her face but kept her expression neutral. "I'm certainly no artist," she said. "Just someone who loves music." "Love," Victor exclaimed, turning to include his audience. "You hear that? She loves music. How charming." He turned back to Elena. "And what did you play when you used to play?" "Piano," she answered simply. Victor's smile widened. "Another coincidence, the same as me." He gestured dramatically. "Though I suspect our experiences have been somewhat different." More laughter rippled through the growing audience. Elena wanted to step back, to disappear into the crowd, but something kept her rooted to the spot. Perhaps it was pride, or perhaps it was the memory of her teacher at the conservatory telling her never to shrink from a challenge. "I'm sure they have," she said. "I teach music to 8-year-olds now. You play for the world's greatest concert halls, teaching children." "How noble," Victor said, but his tone suggested he found it anything but. "And do you ever play for audiences? Small ones, perhaps? Church gatherings? School recitals?" Before Elena could answer, one of Victor's companions, a thin man with glasses, whispered something in his ear that made Victor's eyes light up with mischief. "An excellent idea, Pavel." Victor turned to the director of the concert hall. "Thomas, we have time before the official program begins, yes?" The director nodded, looking confused. "About 20 minutes, but perfect." Victor clapped his hands. "Together. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a wonderful idea. Our friend here," he gestured to Elena. "I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name." "Elena," she said quietly. "Elena. Our friend Elena here loves music and used to play the piano. What better way to begin our evening than with a small warm-up performance?" Elena's eyes widened. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly." "Nonsense," Victor said, waving away her protest. "It would be a treat for us all, and it would give our audience a chance to appreciate the difference between various levels of musicianship." His meaning was clear. He wanted to use her as a contrast, a way to make his own performance seem even more impressive by comparison. The cruelty of it took her breath away. People were watching now, curious and entertained by the unexpected drama. Some looked uncomfortable, sensing the unkindness in Victor's suggestion, but no one spoke up. "Really, I haven't performed in decades," Elena said, her voice firmer now. "I would only embarrass myself." "And there's nothing wrong with that," Victor said, his tone falsely generous. "Music is for everyone, at all levels. Isn't that what you teach your students?" Elena felt trapped. To refuse now would seem as though she agreed with Victor's assessment, that she wasn't good enough, that she belonged in a different category altogether. From the front of the small crowd, an elderly man with kind eyes and a weathered face spoke up. "Give it a try, dear. What's the worst that could happen?" She looked at him, grateful for the gentle encouragement but still hesitant. The man nodded slightly as if to say he understood exactly what was happening and was on her side. Victor, sensing her wavering, pressed his advantage. "The piano is already prepared for me. Just a short piece, something simple. For Elise, perhaps. Everyone knows that one." The suggestion, that she could only manage a beginner's piece, was the final push Elena needed. 25 years ago, she had been preparing for a career as a concert pianist. She had played Rachmaninoff, Liszt, and Prokofiev. She had once been called the most promising student in her year, All right, she said quietly. Victor's eyebrows rose in surprise. He hadn't expected her to accept. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, but it was quickly replaced by smug anticipation. Wonderful, he exclaimed, gesturing toward the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, an unexpected addition to our program. Elena, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your last name. Sorokin, she said. Elena Sorokin will play for us before the official concert. Begins. A courageous amateur to set the stage for our evening of true artistry. He said it as though he were doing her a favor, but everyone could hear the joke in his voice. This was entertainment at her expense, a chance for the famous pianist to show his superiority. As Victor led the way to the stage, Elena followed with measured steps. Her heart was pounding, and her hands felt cold. It had been so long since she had played for anyone other than her students or herself. But with each step, memories returned, of countless hours at the piano, of the joy she had found in the music, of the dreams she had reluctantly set aside. By the time she reached the gleaming grand piano at the center of the stage, something had changed. The fear was still there, but alongside it was a long-forgotten feeling, determination. Elena stood beside the grand piano, aware of every eye in the room on her. The stage lights felt warm on her face, and the polished black surface of the instrument gleamed under their glow. It had been 25 years since she had stood on a proper stage, and the familiar flutter of nerves in her stomach brought back memories of her conservatory days. Victor gestured grandly toward the piano bench like a game show host revealing a prize. Please, he said, his voice carrying through the hall. Make yourself comfortable. From the corner of her eye, Elena could see him backing away, moving to stand with a group of his friends at the edge of the stage. They were whispering, barely, hiding their smirks behind their hands. In the front row, the elderly man who had encouraged her gave a small nod. Elena sat down and adjusted the bench, buying herself a moment to steady her breathing. The keys before her were pristine, perfectly maintained for Victor's performance later. She placed her hands in her lap, suddenly aware of their imperfections, the small calluses from gardening, a paper cut on her index finger, nails cut short, for practicality rather than appearance. These were not the hands of a concert pianist. These were the hands of a woman who had built a different life than the one she had once imagined. Whenever you're ready, Victor called out, a hint of impatience in his voice. Perhaps start with something simple. A waltz, maybe? A few titters of laughter came from the audience. Elena looked up and saw hundreds of faces watching her with expressions ranging from pity to amusement to second-hand embarrassment. She recognized a few well-known music critics in the front rows, their expressions already set in polite disinterest. In that moment, sitting before a piano that had been played by the greatest musicians in the world, Elena considered walking away. It would be the sensible thing to do. She was a school teacher, not a performer. She practiced in the evenings on an upright piano in her small apartment, playing for no one but herself. But then she thought of her students, the children she taught to love music, to be brave when trying something difficult, to play with their hearts and not just their fingers. What would she tell them about this moment if she simply walked away? Elena closed her eyes briefly, letting her fingertips rest lightly on the cool keys. She hadn't prepared for this. She hadn't practiced for a performance in decades. But there was one piece that had stayed with her, one that she played when she was happy, when she was sad, when she needed to remember who she had been and who she still was beneath the layers of everyday life. She opened her eyes, positioned her hands, and began to play. The first chords of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the hall, those famous bell-like chords that build slowly, creating a foundation for all that follows. Elena played them with careful precision, feeling the familiar stretch in her fingers. The piece was impossibly difficult, one of the most challenging in the classical repertoire. Most pianists spent months preparing to perform it. In the wings, Victor's smug smile faltered. He had expected Fürelise or perhaps a simple Mozart piece, something an amateur might play at a holiday party. The opening of the Rachmaninoff was ambitious, but many pianists could play those opening chords reasonably well before stumbling when the real technical challenges began. Elena moved beyond the opening sequence, her fingers finding their way through the complex patterns as though guided by muscle memory. Each note led naturally to the next, like words in a language she had not spoken aloud in years but had never truly forgotten. In the audience, the quiet murmurs faded. A music critic in the second row sat forward in his seat. The elderly man in the front row closed his eyes, a smile spreading across his face. As Elena played, something remarkable happened. The nervousness that had made her hands tremble earlier disappeared. The awareness of the audience, of Victor watching from the side, of the intimidating grandeur of the concert hall, all of it receded. There was only the music, flowing through her as it had when she was 20 years old and full of dreams. This wasn't the careful practice of someone trying not to make mistakes. This was music as it was meant to be played, alive, breathing, telling a story of longing and hope and quiet determination. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm, her face reflecting the emotion carried in each phrase. In the third row, a woman wiped away a tear. Near the back, a young pianist studying at the local university watched with his mouth slightly open, recognizing the extraordinary talent before him. And in the wings, Victor Lebedev stood completely still, the blood draining from his face. Elena had reached the heart of the first movement, where the melody soars above rippling arpeggios. Her left hand maintained the complex rhythm while her right brought out the singing quality of the main theme. It was here that her years away from the concert stage should have been most apparent. This passage required not just technical skill, but a deep artistic sensibility that most believed could only come from years of professional performance. Yet Elena played it as though the music were a part of her, as natural as breathing. The richness of tone she drew from the piano filled every corner of the hall, carrying with it echoes of Russian winters, of heartbreak, of resilience. In her mind, Elena wasn't in Vienna anymore. She was back in Moscow, in the small practice room where she had first learned this piece. She could almost feel the presence of her old teacher, Irina Petrova, standing behind her, saying in her gruff but kind voice, "Good, Elenushka. Now make them feel it here." Irina would always tap her chest when she said this, reminding Elena that technique was worthless without heart. The audience had fallen under a spell. Even those who had come only to see Victor, who had been prepared to politely endure an amateur's awkward performance, were transfixed. This was not what they had expected. This was not an elementary school teacher playing a simple tune. This was artistry of the highest caliber. As Elena approached the end of the first movement, building toward its powerful conclusion, her fingers moved with increasing confidence. The technical difficulties that had once required hours of practice now seemed to resolve themselves. It was as though all the music she had kept inside herself for 25 years was finally finding its voice. The final chords of the movement rang out, powerful and resolute. Then silence. For a moment, no one moved, no one even seemed to breathe. Elena's hands rested on the keys, her head bowed slightly, her eyes still closed. The absence of sound after such emotional music created a vacuum in the hall, a shared moment of stunned appreciation. Then the elderly man in the front row stood up. Slowly, deliberately, he began to clap. A woman behind him rose to her feet, as well, her applause joining his. Within seconds, the entire audience was standing, their applause growing from scattered to thunderous. Elena opened her eyes, momentarily confused by the response. She had been so lost in the music that she had almost forgotten where she was and why she was playing. The sound of applause brought her back to reality, to the concert hall, to the charity gala, to the fact that she had just performed one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire without preparation, in front of a knowledgeable audience that included professional musicians and critics. She stood shakily and gave a small, awkward bow. The applause intensified. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" from the balcony, and others took up the cry. At the side of the stage, Victor remained, frozen. His friend Pavel nudged him, whispering urgently, Say something, you need to say something. Victor stepped forward mechanically, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. The audience quieted somewhat as he approached Elena, though the applause continued. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice not quite steady, "I believe we have just witnessed something unexpected." It was hardly the gracious acknowledgement the moment called for, but it was all he seemed able to manage. His expression was a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and something else, perhaps a grudging recognition of genuine talent. Elena looked at him, her eyes clear and direct. There was no triumph in her gaze, no desire to humiliate him as he had tried to humiliate her. There was only the quiet dignity of someone who knew her own worth and had just remembered how it felt to share her gift with others. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said simply, her voice barely audible above the continuing applause. The concert hall director hurried onto the stage, his face flushed with excitement. "That was extraordinary, truly extraordinary," he said, taking Elena's hand. Would you consider playing the entire concerto? We have an orchestra, of course, and with minimal rehearsal." "Oh, no," Elena said, genuinely startled by the suggestion. "I couldn't possibly. This was just, I don't know what this was." But the audience had heard the director's words, and a new chant began to rise from the crowd. "More! More! More!" Elena looked out at the sea of faces, strangers who moments ago had been prepared to pity her, who now looked at her with admiration and excitement. She saw the elderly man in the front row, beaming at her with what looked like pride. She saw young music students watching her with wide eyes, perhaps seeing in her a different kind of role model than the famous, polished Victor. And she realized that something had shifted, not just in how they saw her, but in how she saw herself. For 25 years she had been Elena the teacher, Elena who used to play, Elena who had set aside her dreams for practical reasons. Now, standing on this stage with the sound of applause washing over her, she was simply Elena the pianist again. She turned back to the piano, her heart racing with a new kind of nervousness, not fear of failure, but the exhilarating uncertainty of stepping back onto a path long abandoned. The audience's chants of "more, more," filled the concert hall, washing over Elena in waves. She stood by the piano, one hand resting lightly on its polished surface for support. The unexpected turn of events had left her feeling as though she were in a dream, the kind where you suddenly find yourself on stage unprepared but unable to leave. The concert hall director was still beside her, his expression hopeful. "Just one more piece," he encouraged. "The audience clearly wants it." Elena glanced toward the wings where Victor stood, his face a complex mixture of emotions, embarrassment, disbelief, and something that might have been respect. He gave a stiff nod, as though granting permission for her to continue using his stage time, though they both knew the decision was no longer his to make. "One more," Elena agreed softly, and the audience erupted in applause again. She returned to the piano bench, adjusting her position with more confidence this time. The initial terror of public performance had faded, replaced by a forgotten but familiar feeling, the focused calm that came with knowing exactly what she was meant to do. Without announcing her selection, Elena began to play Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor. Where the Rachmaninoff had been bold and dramatic, this piece began with a gentle, questioning melody. It was like a story being told in musical form, starting quietly, building in complexity and emotion, eventually erupting into passages of incredible technical difficulty. In the audience, a well-known music critic took out a small notebook and began to write. Next to him, a woman who had come only because her husband had insisted closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. In the very back of the hall, a young security guard who had never attended a classical concert in his life stood transfixed, forgetting to check the doors as he was supposed to do. Elena played without sheet music, drawing on years of private practice and the muscle memory that had somehow survived decades away from the stage. Her fingers moved with increasing confidence, finding the delicate balance between technical precision and emotional expression that defines truly exceptional performances. As the piece progressed, building toward its turbulent middle section, Elena allowed herself to be fully present in the moment. She was aware of the audience's rapt attention, of the perfect action of the concert grand piano responding to her touch, of the acoustics of the hall carrying each note to the farthest corners. But most of all, she was aware of the music itself, the genius of Chopin's composition, the story it told of struggle and triumph, of quiet determination and eventual resolution. It was a story not unlike her own, she realized, though she had never thought of it that way before. In the wings, Victor watched with a growing sense of unease. He had recognized Elena's talent during the Rachmaninoff, but had assumed it was a fluke. Perhaps she had obsessively practiced that one piece to near perfection. But this Chopin was different. This showed range, versatility, and a deep musical understanding that couldn't be explained by simple practice. As Elena reached the technically demanding final section of the ballade, her fingers flying across the keys in dizzying arpeggios and complex patterns, Victor's unease gave way to a reluctant admiration. She wasn't just good, she was extraordinary, and he had tried to humiliate her in front of everyone. The piece ended with powerful, decisive chords, and again the hall erupted in applause. This time, people were on their feet before the final notes had faded away. The ovation was even more enthusiastic than before, with shouts of "Brava!" echoing throughout the hall. Elena stood and bowed, her face flushed with exertion and emotion. The concert hall director rushed back on stage, accompanied by an older woman Elena recognized as the head of the charity organization hosting the gala. "Ladies and gentlemen," the director said into a microphone, his voice barely audible over the continuing applause, "I believe we have just witnessed something truly remarkable." The audience quieted somewhat, though the excitement in the air remained palpable. "Our scheduled program this evening features the brilliant Victor Lebedev," the director continued, gesturing toward the wings where Victor stood. "But sometimes, life gives us unexpected gifts." The elderly man in the front row who had first encouraged Elena to play called out, "Let her play the whole concert." This suggestion was met with enthusiastic agreement from many in the audience. The charity head looked alarmed, clearly concerned about changing the advertised program, but the director seemed to be considering it. Elena stepped forward. "Please," she said, her voice stronger now. "I've taken enough time. Victor is a world-class pianist and you've all come to hear him play." It was the gracious thing to say, and she meant it. Despite Victor's attempt to embarrass her, she had no desire to steal his concert or humiliate him in return. She understood too well how much preparation went into a performance, how much a musician's identity was wrapped up in their art. The director looked uncertain, glancing between Elena and the wings where Victor remained partially hidden from the audience. Making a decision, he gestured for Victor to join them on stage. Victor emerged slowly, his usual confident stride replaced by a more measured pace. The audience applauded politely, though with noticeably less enthusiasm than they had shown for Elena. "Perhaps," the director suggested, improvising, "we could have something unprecedented, a duet perhaps, or alternating pieces." Victor looked at Elena, really looked at her for the first time. Earlier, he had seen only what he expected to see. An ordinary woman, an amateur, someone to use as a foil for his own brilliance. Now, he saw something different, a fellow artist who, for reasons he didn't understand, had hidden her light from the world. "I would be honored," he said, his voice carrying a sincerity that surprised even him, "if Ms. Sorokin would consider playing with me." The audience broke into applause again. Elena looked at Victor with surprise, searching his face for any sign of mockery or insincerity. She found none. "I haven't rehearsed," she said quietly, "for his ears only. I haven't performed with anyone in 25 years. "Neither have I," he replied with a small smile. "Not truly. Not with someone of equal talent." The compliment was unexpected, and Elena felt tears threatening. She blinked them away quickly and nodded her agreement. "What shall we play?" she asked. Victor thought for a moment. "Mozart's Sonata for 2 pianos in D major. It's in the standard repertoire." "I assume you know it." Elena nodded. She had taught the simpler sections to advanced students, though she hadn't played the full piece in years. A second piano was wheeled onto the stage, positioned so that the two musicians would face each other. The audience buzzed with excitement at this unexpected turn of events. The critics in attendance leaned forward in their seats, recognizing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. As the pianos were prepared, the elderly man who had encouraged Elena approached the stage. The security guards moved to stop him, but the director waved them away. "Excuse me," the man said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "I thought you might want these." He handed a small velvet pouch to Elena. Inside were two antique hair combs, delicately carved with mother-of-pearl flowers. "They belonged to my late wife," he explained. "She was a pianist too. Not as good as you, but she loved music with her whole heart. She would have wanted you to have them for your first real concert." Elena was speechless. She looked at the beautiful combs, then at the kind face of the old man. "I can't accept these," she started to say. "Please," he interrupted gently. "She would have loved to hear you play. Consider it a thank you for making an old man remember what it feels like to be moved by music again." With trembling hands, Elena took the combs and secured her hair, which had begun to come loose during her passionate playing. The small gesture of preparation, of making herself ready for a formal performance, felt significant, an acknowledgement that this was real, that she was really about to perform a duet with one of the world's most famous pianists. The pianos were ready. Victor sat at one, adjusting the bench with practiced precision. Elena took her place at the other, acutely aware of the contrast between them. His tailored concert attire and her simple blue dress, his decades of international acclaim and her years of quiet teaching. Yet when she placed her hands on the keys, the differences seemed to matter less. Victor nodded to her, a professional courtesy between equals. "Shall we begin?" Elena took a deep breath and nodded in return. Together, they began the Mozart Sonata, their hands moving in perfect synchronization from the very first notes. The piece was written as a conversation between two pianos, each taking turns with the melody, sometimes supporting, sometimes challenging each other. It required not just technical skill, but a deep musical sensitivity and awareness of the other player. To the amazement of the audience, and perhaps to Victor and Elena themselves, they played as though they had rehearsed together for months. When Victor introduced a slight ritardando in one passage, Elena followed instinctively. When she brought out a counter-melody that was often overlooked, he adjusted his playing to complement her interpretation. The music flowed between them, around, them through them. There were moments when Elena caught Victor's eye across the pianos, and a wordless understanding passed between them. The unique communion that exists between musicians who speak the same language of notes and phrases and emotional truths. The audience watched in wonder as the famous pianist and the unknown schoolteacher created something beautiful together, something that transcended the strange circumstances that had brought them to this point. In the front row, the elderly man who had given Elena the combs wiped tears from his eyes. Near the back, a young couple who had come to the concert on their first date held hands tightly, sensing that they were witnessing something they would tell their grandchildren about someday. And on stage, Elena felt a joy she had almost forgotten existed, the pure, transcendent happiness of making music not alone in her apartment, but as part of something larger, something shared. With each note, each phrase, each musical breath, she felt as though a part of herself that had been sleeping for 25 years was finally fully awake. The final notes of the Mozart Sonata hung in the air for a breathless moment before the concert hall erupted in thunderous applause. Elena and Victor rose from their piano benches simultaneously, turning to face the audience that was now on its feet, their faces alight with the special joy that comes from witnessing something extraordinary and unexpected. They bowed together, and Victor, in a gesture that surprised both Elena and the audience, reached for her hand and raised it high, a clear acknowledgement of her as an equal. The applause intensified with shouts of "Bravo!" echoing throughout the hall. As they took a second bow, Elena noticed a young woman in the third row holding up a phone, recording the performance. She wasn't the only one. Dozens of phones were raised throughout the audience, capturing this unusual moment. In the age of social media, Elena realized, what had happened tonight wouldn't remain within the walls of this concert hall. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. The concert hall director approached them as they straightened. From their bow, his face flushed with excitement. "Extraordinary. Simply extraordinary," he exclaimed. "I don't think we've ever had a performance quite like this at the Vienna Grand." Behind him, the charity organizer looked equally delighted. "This will be the most talked-about gala in years," she said, clasping her hands together. "The donors are absolutely thrilled." Victor turned to Elena, still holding her hand. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice sincere in a way it hadn't been earlier in the evening. "I haven't played like that in... I can't remember how long." Before Elena could respond, they were surrounded by well-wishers. Patrons of the arts, music critics, fellow musicians, all eager to congratulate them and especially to learn more about the mysterious pianist who had appeared from nowhere to deliver such a stunning performance. "Where do you perform regularly?" asked a woman who introduced herself as the director of a prestigious music festival. "I don't," Elena replied honestly. "I teach elementary school music." The woman blinked in surprise. "But that's criminal." "With your talent?" Elena smiled. "I love teaching children. Music education is important." Of course," the woman agreed hastily. "But surely there's room for both in your life, teaching and performing." Before Elena could answer, a well-known music critic joined them, notebook in hand. "Ms. Sorokin, your interpretation of Rachmaninoff was unlike anything I've heard in recent years. The emotional depth combined with such technical precision. May I ask where you studied?" "Moscow Conservatory," Elena replied. "But I didn't complete my degree." The critic's eyebrows shot up. "And yet you play at this level? Remarkable. Simply remarkable. I must include this in my review. The school teacher who outshone the master." At this, Victor winced slightly. The critic, noticing his reaction, quickly added, "Though Mr. Lebedev's performance in the Mozart was equally brilliant, of course. The chemistry between you two was palpable. Have you worked together before?" "No," they both said simultaneously, then glanced at each other and smiled. "Well, you must do so again," the critic insisted. "The musical world needs this kind of spontaneous brilliance." As more people pressed forward with questions and compliments, Elena began to feel overwhelmed. The adrenaline that had carried her through the performances was fading, leaving her tired and slightly disoriented. This world of professional musicians and critics, of concert halls and reviews, was one she had left behind long ago. Or rather, one that had never fully been hers to begin with. Victor, with the instincts of someone accustomed to public attention, sensed her discomfort. "Perhaps we could continue this discussion at the reception," he suggested to the growing crowd. "I believe Ms. Sorokin and I both need a moment to recover." The crowd reluctantly dispersed, moving toward the reception area where champagne and hors d'oeuvres awaited. Victor guided Elena to a quiet corner backstage, away from the immediate press of admirers. "Are you all right?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. Elena nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure it was true. "It's just a lot. I haven't been in the spotlight like this since I was 20. "Why did you stop?" Victor asked, the question direct but his tone gentle. "With your talent, you could have had an international career." Elena looked at him, considering how much to share. This man had tried to humiliate her just hours ago, yet now he was looking at her with what seemed like genuine interest and respect. "Mother became ill," she said finally. "I was the only one who could care for her. I left the conservatory and took teaching jobs to pay for her medical expenses." "And after she recovered?" Victor prompted. "She didn't recover," Elena said simply. "She was ill for 7 years before she passed away. By then I was 30. Too old to restart a career as a concert pianist, especially with an incomplete education. And I had discovered that I loved teaching." Victor was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "But you continued to play?" To practice at that level? Elena smiled. Music was my escape, my joy. I play every evening at home, sometimes for hours. For no one but yourself, Victor mused as though the concept was foreign to him. For myself, Elena agreed, and occasionally for my students, though I simplify things for them, of course. The concert hall director approached them, interrupting their conversation. Excuse me, but there's someone who insists on speaking with both of you. A representative from Universal Records. Victor straightened, immediately alert. Universal was one of the largest classical music labels in the world. Of course, he said, we'd be happy to meet with them. The director led them to a small office where a sharply dressed woman waited, a tablet computer in her hands. She introduced herself as Natalia Orlova, talent scout for Universal's classical division. What happened tonight is already going viral, she said without preamble, turning her tablet to show them a social media page where a video of their performance was rapidly accumulating views and shares. The famous pianist and the schoolteacher. People love this story, and more importantly, they love your music. She looked directly at Elena. We'd like to offer you a recording contract, a duet album with Mr. Lebedev to start with. If that's successful, which I have no doubt it will be, we can discuss solo projects. Elena stared at her in disbelief. A recording contract? For me? For both of you, Natalia clarified. The chemistry you displayed tonight was exceptional, and frankly, the story behind it is marketing gold. The arrogant maestro and the humble teacher. Redemption, discovery, second chances. People eat that up. But more importantly, she added quickly, seeing Victor's expression darken slightly. The music was superb, genuinely moving. Victor turned to Elena. It's your decision, he said, surprising her again with his deference. I already have a contract with them for my next 3 albums, but they're offering you something new here. Elena's mind was spinning. A recording contract, professional performances, a return to the world she had left behind so many years ago. It seemed impossible, like something from a dream. I have teaching obligations, she said, thinking out loud. My students are preparing for their spring concert. Natalia waved a hand dismissively. We can work around your schedule initially. Record on weekends, school holidays. If things take off, you might want to reconsider your teaching load. But that's for later discussion. The elderly man who had given Elena the hair combs appeared in the doorway, having somehow found his way backstage. Excuse me, he said, his voice gentle but firm. I couldn't help overhearing. May I offer some thoughts? Natalia looked annoyed at the interruption, but Elena nodded, grateful for the presence of someone who had shown her nothing but kindness tonight. My wife, the old man said, was faced with a similar choice once. She chose the safer path, the more practical one. She had a good life, a happy one in many ways. But there was always a part of her that wondered what might have been. He looked directly at Elena. She told me once that the music never left her, but the chance to share it did. Don't let that happen to you, my dear. His words hung in the air, simple, but profound. Elena touched the mother-of-pearl combs in her hair, feeling a connection to the unknown woman who had worn them before her, who had loved music as she did. Could I really do both? She asked, looking from Natalia to Victor to the old man. Teach and perform. Many musicians do. Victor said, not at your level of teaching commitment perhaps, but it's possible to find a balance. One of Elena's students, a 10-year-old girl with bright eyes and a fierce dedication to the piano, flashed in her mind. What would it mean to that child, to see her teacher performing professionally, pursuing her passion while still remaining committed to education? I need time to think, Elena said finally. This is all happening very fast. Natalia nodded, though she looked impatient. The offer stands for a week, but I should warn you, the viral nature of this story means other labels will be calling soon. We're just the first. As if to emphasize her point, Elena's small clutch purse began to vibrate with incoming messages. She had left her phone inside it during the performance and had forgotten about it until now. She opened it to find dozens of notifications. Friends and colleagues had already seen clips of her performance online, and were messaging with excited disbelief. The school principal had texted, "Is that really you on stage with Viktor Lebedev?" The world was already responding to what had happened tonight, already reshaping itself around this new reality, where Elena Sorokin was not just a dedicated teacher but a pianist of exceptional talent. The change she had so long ago accepted as permanent, from performer to teacher, from public artist to private practitioner, was being undone in real time, through the alchemy of social media and the power of a single unexpected performance. Viktor watched her scrolling through the messages, her expression a mixture of wonder and apprehension. He had begun the evening seeing her as nothing more than a prop for his own ego, a way to make himself look better by comparison. Now he found himself hoping she would accept the offer, that she would step fully back into a world she clearly belonged in, not just for her sake but selfishly for his own. Playing with her had awakened something in him, a freshness and joy in music that had been gradually fading beneath the pressures of fame and constant performance. "Whatever you decide," he said quietly. "Thank you for tonight. You've reminded me of something important." "What's that?" Elena asked, looking up from her phone. Viktor smiled, a genuine smile without the practiced charm he usually displayed. "That music isn't about showing off or being the best, it's about connecting. With the composer, with the audience," he paused, "with another musician who speaks the same language." Outside the office, they could hear the buzz of the reception, continuing. People discussing what they had witnessed, a story already taking shape that would be told and retold. But in this moment, Elena felt strangely calm, as though she had stepped into the eye of a storm. 25 years ago, life had taken an unexpected turn, pulling her away from the path she had imagined for herself. Tonight, it had taken another turn, equally unexpected, offering her a second chance she had never thought possible. What happened next would be her choice. For now, that was enough. 1 year later, Elena stood in the wings of the Vienna Grand Concert Hall, watching as stagehands made final adjustments to the 2 grand pianos positioned at center stage, the same stage where, exactly 1 year ago, her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. She wore a simple but elegant black dress, her dark hair styled in a sophisticated updo, secured with the mother-of-pearl combs that had become something of a good luck charm. In her hand she held a small bouquet of white roses, a gift from her students, who would be sitting in the front rows tonight. Nervous? Elena turned to find Viktor beside her, looking dapper in his concert attire. Gone was the arrogance that had once defined him, replaced by a quiet confidence that was somehow more compelling. "A little," she admitted with a smile, "but a good kind of nervous, like the first day of school." Viktor nodded in understanding. "A year ago, I would have told you that nervousness is for amateurs. Now I think it's the body's way of telling us that what we're doing matters." So much had changed in a year. The video of their impromptu performance had indeed gone viral, garnering millions of views and launching what the music press called the most unexpected collaboration in classical music. Their duet album, recorded during school holidays and weekends, had been released 3 months ago to critical acclaim and surprising commercial success. But the changes went beyond their professional achievements. Elena had restructured her teaching schedule, reducing her hours but not eliminating them entirely. She now taught master classes at the conservatory 2 days a week and maintained a small group of private students, including several from her original elementary school class whose parents had been determined not to lose her as a teacher. Viktor, meanwhile, had undergone his own transformation. The experience of being humbled publicly and then finding unexpected artistic fulfillment in collaboration rather than solo glory had softened his sharp edges. He had established a foundation to provide musical education to underprivileged children, inspired in part by Elena's dedication to teaching, and tonight, they were giving their first formal concert together, returning to the place where their story had begun. 5 minutes, called the stage manager, passing by with a clipboard. Elena took a deep breath. "I still can't quite believe this is happening." "Which part?" Viktor asked with a gentle smile. "The sold-out concert hall? The recording? Contract? Or the fact that you're sharing a stage with someone who tried to humiliate you a year ago? All of it, Elena said honestly. But especially the last part. I never expected us to become friends. And they had become friends. Good friends. With a relationship built on mutual respect and a shared love of music. Their weekly rehearsals had evolved to include dinners afterward, long conversations about interpretation and technique, about teaching philosophies and life experiences. Victor had even visited her classroom once, playing simple duets with her young students, showing a patience and kindness that would have been unthinkable a year ago. I was terrible to you that night, Victor said, his voice quiet with regret. I've never properly apologized. You've apologized 100 times in 100 different ways, Elena replied. Through your actions, through your music. Words aren't always necessary. The stage manager approached them again. We're ready for you. House is full and they're getting restless with anticipation. Together they walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. The audience rose to their feet, many holding phones to capture the moment. Elena scanned the crowd and found her students, bouncing excitedly in their seats, their faces alight with pride. Behind them sat the elderly man who had given her the hair combs, now a regular attendee at her performances and something of a grandfather figure in her life. Elena and Victor took their places at their respective pianos and exchanged a look of quiet understanding. This concert was special not just because it marked the anniversary of their first meeting, but because they would be premiering an original composition, a piece they had written together over the past 6 months, telling their story through music. They had titled it simply Unexpected. Victor nodded to her, and Elena began with a solo passage that echoed the opening of the Rachmaninoff she had played a year ago. But this quickly transformed into something new, a melody that spoke of hesitation, of hidden talents, of dreams set aside but never forgotten. Victor joined in, his piano representing his former self, bold, showy, technically brilliant but somehow hollow. As the piece progressed, the two musical voices that had started in opposition began to find common ground. They echoed each other, challenged each other, and finally began to harmonize in ways that created something greater than either could have achieved alone. In the audience, a music critic who had followed their story from the beginning wiped away a tear. A young pianist studying at the conservatory listened with rapt attention, understanding that she was witnessing not just a beautiful performance, but a living lesson in artistic growth and human connection. The piece built to a powerful climax, before resolving into a gentle, hopeful conclusion that had both pianos playing in perfect harmony, neither voice dominating the other. As the final notes faded away, there was a moment of perfect silence, that magical pause that occurs when an audience is so moved they momentarily forget to applaud. Then the hall erupted in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Elena and Victor stood and bowed, first to the audience and then to each other, a gesture of mutual respect that had become their trademark. As they took their second bow, Victor leaned close to Elena and whispered, "Look at the third row center." Elena scanned the audience and spotted a distinguished-looking woman with silver hair, applauding with tears streaming down her face. "Who is she?" Elena whispered back, as they straightened from their bow. "Irina Petrova," Victor replied. "Your former teacher from the Moscow Conservatory. I found her through some old contacts and flew her in for the concert. She's been following your story and is incredibly proud." Elena's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Irina Petrova had been more than a teacher to her. She had been a mentor, a guide, almost a second mother during Elena's conservatory years. Elena had lost contact with her after leaving Moscow, too ashamed of her abandoned career to reach out. As they left the stage after their third bow, only to return moments later for an encore, Elena whispered, "Thank you. That's the most meaningful gift anyone has ever given me." Victor smiled. It seemed right that she should see what her student has become. Their encore was Rachmaninoff's Vocalise, arranged for 2 pianos, a piece of such haunting beauty that it left many in the audience openly weeping. As they played, Elena thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had once believed that life was a straight line, that decisions once made were irrevocable, that dreams deferred were dreams lost forever. But the past year had taught her otherwise. Life, she had discovered, was more like music itself, full of unexpected harmonies, surprising developments, themes that disappeared only to return transformed later. After the concert, there was a reception in the grand foyer. Elena moved through, the crowd accepting congratulations and kind words, but her eyes were searching for one person in particular. She found Irina Petrova standing near a window looking out at the Vienna night. The older woman turned as Elena approached, her eyes bright with tears and pride. "Elenushka," she said, using the affectionate nickname from long ago. "My brilliant girl." They embraced, years of separation dissolving in an instant. When they pulled apart, Irina held Elena at arm's length, studying her face. "You play even better now than you did at 20, she said. "There is a depth to your music that only life can teach." "I thought you would be disappointed in me," Elena confessed, "for giving up, for not completing my studies." Irina shook her head firmly. "Music is not just for concert halls and recordings. It lives wherever someone plays with their whole heart. You never gave up music. You just found a different way to live with it. And now, it seems, you have found a way to have both." Across the room, Victor was deep in conversation with a group of music educators, gesturing enthusiastically as he explained his foundation's latest initiative. Catching Elena's eye, he smiled and raised his glass in a small toast. Elena was reminded of something he had said during one of their rehearsals. "We spend so much time trying to be the best, to stand above others. Maybe the real achievement is finding the courage to stand beside someone instead." Later that night, after the reception had ended and the concert hall had emptied, Elena returned to the stage alone. The cleaning staff, recognizing her, smiled and continued their work in other areas, giving her a moment of privacy. She sat at one of the pianos, the same instrument she had played a year ago when a cruel joke had unexpectedly opened a door she had thought forever closed. Placing her fingers on the keys, she played a few notes of Chopin, soft and reflective. Life rarely went according to plan. Dreams were sometimes deferred, paths diverted. But sometimes, if you were lucky, if you kept your heart open and your hands ready, life offered second chances, not to return to who you once were, but to become someone new, someone who carried the wisdom of detours and disappointments, who understood that no experience was ever truly wasted. The cleaning staff supervisor approached respectfully. "Excuse me, Ms. Sorokin, but we need to lock up soon." Elena nodded and stood, running her fingers one last time across the polished surface of the piano. "Of course. Thank you for giving me a moment." As she left the concert hall, she paused in the doorway and looked back at the empty stage, now dimly lit by security lights. So much had changed in a year. So much would continue to change in the years to come. But one thing would remain constant: the music that had always lived inside her, waiting patiently to be heard.